Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here, welcome back to the railway and welcome to the start of another Loco scratch build project. I did say that my next scratch built Loco was going to be a diesel shunter of some sort, and at the time I said that is what I intended, but if I'm being absolutely honest with you, I don't really fancy that at the moment. I'm not passionate about that right now. And when you do these scratch build projects, passion is really one of the most important ingredients, because these projects can take 2 weeks to a month very easily to design and build. And if you're not absolutely passionate about that locomotive, if you don't love it to bits, if you're not desperate to see it complete, that month can be incredibly tedious, and that hard work is very, very much more difficult. However, I have found a locomotive that has awakened that passion inside me, and it's the locomotive I've decided to do. It's a very obscure, old-fashioned pre-grouping locomotive. Online there's very, very little information. I've found very few photos on it, and that is a sort of challenge to me, and that is partly why I've wanted to do it. So the Loco I found pictures of was this. It is the Great Eastern Railway number 552, or the 552 class, which is an 060 tender engine. Like I say, there is precious little information online about these things. The Great Eastern Railway Society say that this was built in 1882, and they rightly point out the unusual footplate shape which arched up over the driving wheels, which exposed them in a very, very strange way. It seems to be that the 552 was some sort of precursor to the J15 locomotives, although it does look very, very different. The details, the design is significantly different from the J15. So my intention is to create a model of 552 in the Great Eastern Blue livery. Now honestly, I'm not sure how prototypical the GER Blue would be for this Loco. This photo at least doesn't seem to show any lining on it, which makes me doubt that. The Great Eastern Railway Society says that Bromley locomotives from the time were probably black or vermilion, but it also says that all new locomotives built from 1882 onwards received the Wurzel Blue livery. So possibly I'm taking a bit of creative liberty with this, but I am going to do it in the Great Eastern Blue, and I don't think it's too absurd to try and do that. But that's the livery. I've got to worry about that later on. There's a more immediate problem to deal with, and that is that I can only find 2 pictures of this locomotive online. The first one you've seen already, that's the side view, and the second one is a much poorer quality photo of a rebuilt 552 from the front end, and that is all I can find online. If you know of any other photos of this thing, please do let me know, because they would really help the project along. Now, I did say I wanted a challenge, but that's a little bit too much of a challenge. I don't have a single photo of the tender, and really, how can you create an even halfway realistic model with just 2 photos, one of them very poor quality? Well, once again, a book has come to my rescue. And here is the book, The Great Eastern Railway, Part 1, compiled by M. Sharman. And this is a book full of different Great Eastern designs, a lot of them fascinating actually, but the ones I want are right towards the back. We've got right here, 552, built in 1882 in original condition. And look, we've got the tender as well, which is fantastic. Now these drawings are quite good. The drawings I had for Gladstone and Copperknob were not good. They looked great on paper, but then when I started sort of analysing them to make the model, I thought, hang on, this and that doesn't make sense. I've not had that with these. These line up with the photos pretty well, and they look pretty good. Now, I said these, that's plural. Well, that's because on the next page, there is this 552 locomotive, rebuilt in 1893. And it's also from the other side. So I've also got a rebuilt 552, which has got some detail differences, as you can see. So my intention is any detail difference between the rebuilt and the unrebuilt 552, I'm going to make sure is a separately fitted detail, so that I could very easily design different details to fit to the base Loco and chassis, body, whatever, and also possibly create a rebuilt version. So while my unrebuilt 552 is going to be in the GER blue, I'm going to try and do a more prototypical livery of this. I'm thinking black, but if you've got any pointers to point me in the right direction as to what the livery would be on this, then please do let me know. But I've got the drawings that I need. These are pretty darn good, nice big detailed drawings. Should be all I need to get started. So I've started this project in exactly the same way that I've started other projects, and that is with the wheels. So I've found some wheels that are the closest I can possibly get to the wheels I want. And I've gone with these, the Hornby 8F wheels. They don't look right, they're not the correct detail, but they are within about 1mm of the wheels on the real 552 to scale. Not 100% correct, but the slightly smaller size will actually help me to incorporate them into the model, because obviously the flanges on a model wheel are larger than they would be in real life. So it will be a little bit easier to incorporate these into my 552. My first piece of design work was to design a centre that fits into that 8F metal tyre that is realistic to the 552 rather than an 8F. Now, I've actually designed a wheel centre for the 8F tyre before when I did my Gladstone tender, so I've got all of the measurements ready. It's just a case of designing the actual spokes and the crank pin holder and all of that stuff. So with the wheels designed, I was able to measure those wheels and recreate their outline in SketchUp, spacing them correctly as per the drawings too, and then I've tied them all together with this very basic chassis block, which at the moment is just approximately the right length. Now I've created the basic running plate shape. After all, this is the signature feature of the 552 Loco. I've also made some cutouts for it in my chassis block so that the running plate actually sits on top of it perfectly. I've also now cut out some slots for the axles, no bearings included yet, although I will be putting slots in for the bearings later on. Before I go ahead and design the mechanism though, I need to know what I'm working with in terms of the space that the mechanism has to fit inside. So to figure that out, I've started creating a basic body shape. It's got the smoke box, it's got the boiler and the beginning of the cab, because I need to know where the cab starts and the boiler ends. I managed to derive all of the values for these parts from the drawings and the photos. I've used a sort of combination. Here's the next step of the basic body evolution. You can see the smoke box is now sort of incorporated into the running plate, although that will be a separate piece, it just sort of matches it in shape. And we've got these boxes on the side of the smoke box as well. The cab front now connects to the firebox, and I've even got some windows in place with separately fitted frames for cleaner painting. Didn't need to do this at this stage, but I just felt it was something I could do, so let's get it out the way. So now that the basic dimensions of the body have been defined, I'm able to start work on the mechanism. So this is the first revision of a new motor unit that I've designed, and this consists of the coreless motor and the worm drive fitted to it, and also a set of intermediary gears to increase the distance between the motor and the driving axle, and also to further gear down the speed of the motor. This is the first version of the design. The motor and the gears just snap into place. I wanted to do this without any extra screws and stuff, but I later changed this design for a more absolute fixing to the chassis block, but I'll show you that later on. The idea here is that this entire motor unit piece will be separate, and that will be screwed onto the main chassis with two screws that go in underneath it. So now I've incorporated this motor unit design into the main chassis design. So you can see where the motor unit will sit in relation to the rest of the chassis. And I've also added bearing slots as promised into the chassis, so the Loco will run on proper bearings. And I've also got a base keeper plate on there as well, which will hold the axles in place. And this will also have the pickups soldered to it as well. Here's an interesting little piece. I've created this very odd looking shape which covers every possible position of the gears plus some clearance room. And I can use this shape and subtract it from the Loco chassis and other parts of the model to allow ample room for the gears. And this is a great way of making sure everything lines up and I've got a perfect standardized space for the gears to fit inside. So to see the result of this, I'm just going to show you the chassis now. You can see how that looks. I've got perfect cutouts for the gears, and you can also see the screw holes that will attach that motor unit. The screws will go in underneath there so that the motor unit doesn't have to be even larger with space for screws on top of it. I've also created a design feature that I hate. I've got a body screw underneath a Loco axle. Now that I would definitely be criticising if I saw that on a professional model, but I need a way to fix the Loco body down at the back, and I can't see another way around this. So I'm connecting the Loco body at the very base of the cab wall, and I will cover all of this with a cab detail piece. But looking at the body, I can't think of anywhere else for this to go. I don't really like the idea of having a lug at the back because, again, that will add complexity. So that's the way I've had to do it. It's actually not too bad as long as you put the Loco together in the right order. It's fair enough. Serviceability, a little bit reduced because of that, but it's a solution. I've now got a cavity in the boiler into which I can put some weights, which will hopefully make the Loco a bit heavier and improve its traction. So now I have a chassis which, in theory, fingers crossed, should work. But now I don't want to move on with development. I don't want to put all of those hours into designing the details and everything around a body and a chassis that doesn't work. So you know what that means? In order to figure out whether what I've done so far is any good, it is prototype time. And I have printed this. Now, the blue colour here is just by coincidence, but it is kind of like the blue I will be going for. We've got the body, the running plate, and the chassis with my 3D printed wheels, and the motor unit and everything inside it so that this should work. Now, there's no tender at the moment, so it's not going to have tender pickups to support it, and I've only got some very rudimentary pickups on just 4 of the 6 wheels. So it's not going to be a nice, smooth, reliable runner by any means, but I'm hoping that it will at least run to an extent so that I can say, yes, this works, let's carry on with the project. So let's get this down onto the track and let's see if it works. All right, first chassis test then. Is there any sign of life at all? Let's bang on the ground. Oh, yeah. All right, so that's not bad. Little bit grumpy, I suppose. Is it going to crawl? It's kind of stuttering and struggling, isn't it? But that's because it's only got 2 pickups per rail. Yeah. But let's see if it can get around the track. I guess that's what I'm more interested in. Oh, there we go. So yeah, that's 50% speed. Definitely a little bit on the speedy side, but I have done my best with the gearing. So yeah, there are some adjustments to be made. There will definitely be an improvement when I add more pickups. I think I also need to make sure that that driving axle is clamped a little bit better, just to make sure the gears mesh perfectly, because there has been a little bit of grinding from that. But besides that, it is sustaining a run. It's not derailing or anything. It's obviously handling the curves okay. So I'm happy to move on. So now it's time to get a bit more cosmetic. You can see that there's been a massive evolution in this next step. I now have a chimney on the smoke box. You saw that on the prototype, but I've also added more detail to this section as well. There's lots of detail on the chassis as well. I looked at the drawings very carefully and put all sorts of different relief onto the chassis there, which I think looks quite good. There's also this airspace right through the Loco, as in real life. I always love the way that looks. And I've even got this separate firebox piece which will fit to the bottom of the base keeper plate, so that you've got the shape of the firebox at the bottom of the Loco. That seems like quite a prominent feature. I've now added a detailed smoke box door with a separate door handle. This will help to obscure that big hole in the front of the smoke box. I've also added a cab roof with the appropriate profile to it, and also a cab interior detail piece which will have a separate reverser wheel and a regulator painted into the appropriate colours, of course, and this does a good job of covering up that screw assembly which is underneath it. Here you can see I've added a dome to the top of the locomotive. This is actually a separate piece to make the painting easier. The lining I'm intending to add to this loco falls either side of this dome, very, very close to it, and it's just going to be too difficult to get to that lining to apply it with that dome in place. So that dome is going to be fitted to the loco after the painting has been done. I've got these handrails. I am intending to 3D print these handrails because they just look neater that way in my opinion, but I have to print them flat. So to get the profile right on these handrails, I've designed them to twist very slightly into the correct shape. No idea how this is going to work, but I'm definitely going to give it a try. I've also designed this safety valve assembly, which is made up of two separate pieces, and I have printed these pieces just to make sure they work as they should. And this whole module is separately fitted, as you can see, and this module is going to be replaceable so that when I want to, I can model a different safety valve assembly for the rebuilt 552. Also, I've got the reverser rod piece in place now with some nice details on it as well. Hopefully that will look good. Now you can see that I have thrown every detail in the book at this loco, really trying to get this finished off now. So we've got separate buffers, two separate parts per buffer, the housing and the buffer itself. I've got guard irons which will be separately fitted as well, and I've also added a little hole for the coupling hook and chain. I'm going to be using pre-made ones, not 3D printed, because they're going to be too fine, so hopefully they will look good. I've also got lamp irons for the buffer beam. I've never really bothered with lamp irons before, but I think this time I'm going to give that a try. I've added cylinders which are moulded in inverted commas into the body, just to give those a little bit of relief on the front. There's loads of stuff here. I've got steps now which fit separately onto the running plate. There's various valves on the side of the smoke box. I've got additional pipe work that stretches the length of the loco, all separately fitted, and I've even got pipe work up on top of the smoke box, which I'm going to separately paint. I've got a whistle incorporated into the pipework piece, which solves that problem, and I've got some nameplates which I'm going to glue to the side of the cab once they have had the detail transfers fitted to them. There's also the steps that go underneath the cab, and they are going to be nice and neatly separately fitted underneath the running plate where you can't see the join. I've also got these brake pads to separately fit to the chassis, so there's going to be 6 of those. I don't really care too much for brake rigging, although I have been toying with that idea. So yeah, let me know what you think. Should I go for brake rigging? Should be reasonably easy to add later on if I want to. Right, so that is the loco complete. It is now time to start looking at the tender. So I've figured out what wheels I need, and I've built a basic frame around these wheels. Already I've decided that the axle boxes and the springs will be separate pieces so that they can be painted separately and then glued into position. Now that I have the frame of the tender sort of modelled in 3D, we can kind of appreciate the lovely design of it. You've got these very ornate arches on it, all of them different in fact. Yeah, none of them are identical. Very, very lovely bit of design. And of course I've got a base keeper plate which has been designed to keep the axles from dropping out, and it should also not be too visible from outside the model. Now for the tender body, which is quite a complex one, but I just decided to go for it. Yeah, it's got some complex curves on it, so rather than trying to mirror the curves manually on both sides, I've just designed the first half of the tender body, and then once I'm happy with the curves, I'll just duplicate them, and then I know they are perfectly symmetrical. Yeah, it looks a little bit like Copper Knob's tender, except quite a bit larger, and it's got this strange lip around the upper section like Copper Knob did. So now the tender has moved on quite a bit. I've of course duplicated the 2 halves of the body. I've added space for a coal load, which I will create later on. There are these little toolboxes on board. tiny little handrails and handles, which will be separately fitted and separately painted, and also these weird containers at the back. I saw these on the drawings and I have found pictures of this sort of tender with them. I have no idea how accurate my representation of these are because I can't get a good photo that shows the whole things. I don't even know whether there should be one on both sides. There might have just been one, but I think they look pretty cool. I've also added buffers and guard irons to the rear buffer beam and of course a NEM pocket underneath there. I've also got this nice subtle snap-on drawbar between the Loco and tender. I designed this drawbar due to the limited space I had on copper knob, and it worked so well that I'm going to use it again. It was a great solution, but this time both ends of that drawbar are going to be snapped together so that you can separate the Loco and tender very easily, and yet it's still a nice strong connection. At this point, having done so much of the work, I realised that the tender body was a few millimeters too tall somehow. Sometimes this just happens, issues creep up on you like this, you've made a mistake. But luckily I managed to fix it. I just stole a few millimeters from the middle of the tender, shunted them back together, and now it looks a lot better. I've now got a coal load to separately fit, and this spills out of the front of the bunker very slightly. I'm hoping that will look quite good. The handrails are a bit of a challenge. These are going to have to be made of real wire due to their shape, so I can't 3D print these. So this is going to be my debut into wire handrails, I guess. I've designed these handrail holders to hold them in place. These are a little bit chunky, hence why the holes in the side of the tender are quite large, but I've printed some as tests and they don't look too far from the ones on my other models. So we'll see how it goes. If it looks awful, this will be the first and last time I do it, but hopefully they'll look good. So I've got a few little bits and bobs still to do on the inside of the tender, but this is the completed CAD for the most part, 99%. And I think it looks pretty good. The detail looks really nice. There's an awful lot on here. I'm not too sure of how many parts there are exactly, but I think it could be the most parts I've ever had on any project. So it's going to be extremely complex to put together. It's been extremely complex to design, but as always, it's been a real pleasure to do this, and I'm really happy with the way it's all come together. So I am so happy with the way this design has turned out. Everything is looking pretty good, but that's on the computer screen. I haven't actually tried to build any of this besides just the prototype that you've seen already. Normally the detail parts work as I've designed them. I've never had a major problem with that, but there's still a lot of hours work here that I'm yet to test. So join me next time where I'll be printing all of this stuff and hopefully assembling a fully detailed prototype. I'm really looking forward to seeing this for the first time in person, and I hope you are as well. So thank you for watching and join me again very soon. All right, cheers folks, take care.